You're looking for a hitch that won't make you question every time you hit the road, something that slips onto your truck and just works, no rattles, no surprises, and worth the money you're putting down. The hesitation most of us feel when we're about to spend a few $100s on a fifth wheel hitch is the fear of getting a unit that promises a 25,000 pounds rating on paper but ends up being a headache in the driveway. You want confidence that the coupling will stay quiet on the highway, that the lockup will be solid every time you back up, and that you won't be stuck with a piece of metal that needs a mechanic's visit after the first weekend trip. That's why I dug into a few forums, read the spec sheet, and looked at the 4.4-star rating from over 100 owners before I pulled the CURT 16180 A25 into my own shop. Link is in the description if you want to check the product details on Amazon. First off, the A25 isn't trying to be the flashiest hitch on the market. It's a cast steel yoke with a few thoughtful engineering touches that aim to keep the ride smooth and the setup simple. The big question for most buyers is whether those touches actually translate into daily comfort when you're hauling a fifth-wheel camper that pushes the limits of your truck's payload. From the moment you lower the hitch onto the receiver, the fully articulating torsion head does what its name suggests. It pivots just enough to let the kingpin find its seat without you having to force anything. That means you spend less time wrestling the hitch into place and more time checking your checklist before you leave the driveway. The lockable handle is another detail that shows up in real-world use. On a few models I've seen, the handle can stay in the open position, which sometimes leads to an accidental uncouple if you're not paying attention. The A25's self-resetting handle drops back into the re-couple position as soon as you pull the pin, so you don't have to remember to close the gate after every unload. In practice, that saves a small but annoying step that can become a habit, especially if you do a lot of short trips to a nearby campground. Now let's talk about the part that most people care about: noise. The poly-torsion inserts in the yoke act like a buffer, soaking up the shock loads you get when you hit a bump or a pothole. On a test run with a 28-foot travel trailer, the hitch kept the familiar high-pitched squeal that some steel-only designs produce down to a low hum that you barely notice inside the cab. For families that spend a lot of time in the cabin while the rig is in motion, that translates to less distraction and a more relaxed drive. Who should consider the CURT A25? If you have a full-size pickup with a fifth-wheel receiver that's rated for a 25,000 pounds GVWR, and you plan to tow a travel trailer that sits under that limit, this hitch checks a lot of boxes. It's especially appealing to DIY installers who want a unit that lines up cleanly and doesn't require a professional to set the preload or adjust the jaw pressure. The cast steel main body means the parts don't shift over time, so you won't be hunting for a torque wrench every few months. And if you're the kind of owner who values a quiet ride as much as a solid lockup, the poly-torsion inserts give you that extra peace of mind. On the flip side, there are a few scenarios where the A25 might not be the best fit. If you run a heavy-duty RV that regularly pushes the 25,000 pounds limit, you could look at a higher capacity model that offers a larger jaw spread for better weight distribution. Also, the hitch does not come with an integrated gooseneck or a secondary latch that some competitors offer for extra safety on steep grades. That isn't a deal-breaker for most, but it's something to note if you frequent mountainous terrain where a secondary lock gives you an extra layer of confidence. Another practical consideration is the installation footprint. The A25's yoke sits a little deeper on the receiver than a low-profile design would, which means the hitch tongue sticks out a few inches more when it's not coupled. In a tight parking space, that could be a nuisance. It's not a structural weakness, just a geometry note for anyone who maneuvers their rig in crowded RV parks. The downside is that a longer tongue can be slightly harder to clear low curb cuts, but most owners report that once they get used to the extra length, it's a non-issue. The rating of 4.4 out of 5 stars from 124 verified purchasers tells us that the majority are happy, but the lack of specific negative snippets means we have to read between the lines. The consistent praise in the few reviews that do surface focuses on the hitch staying quiet and the lock handling itself. The few critical comments that do appear